Hey, it's PokeDad. Apparently there's a big election happening soon. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, it got me thinking, who would win a Pokemon election? For the Pokemon, by the Pokemon? To find out, I developed a behavioral model for Pokemon to head to the polls. Why modeling? Well, this way we have a rational outcome, rather than Salazzle taking the win by default, because it's perfectly suited to a toxic environment where everyone gets burned. Now, jokes aside, before we start, I have to say this is not a political video, and it was both written and uploaded before the US election in November 2024. There's also no commentary on the US election, aside from a cheeky joke here and there. Instead, this video is just using electoral systems for a Pokemon popularity contest. If you enjoy the video, make sure to subscribe. Okay, ground rules. For these elections, we have 18 candidates, one for each type of Pokemon. What? Did you think all 1,025 Pokemon were competing? I mean, yeah, I'm insane, but not that insane. No, instead, one monotype Pokemon will represent each type at the polls. Don't worry, there's no low-hanging fruit here. We don't have Lurantis for grass or Gumshoes for normal, even though the campaign slogans are just so easy. No, here are our 18 candidates. They might seem random, but they've been chosen for slogans that deal super effective dad jokes. Mostly. And you'll see all 18 slogans later in the video, but here's Ditto for a sneak peek. So, how will voting work? All Pokemon will have one rational vote. Well, a little more than that. All 1,025 base forms, plus regional forms, and some other Pokemon that have static form changes, impacting their types or other major changes to that Pokemon, like Rotom and Deoxys, but not like Vivillon and Unknown. This brings us to a total of 1,127 voting Pokemon. And like I said, they cast their vote rationally. How? Well, politics at its base level boils down to power and influence. Therefore, when possible, a Pokemon must base its vote on serving itself, and subsequently voting for types that it can influence. For our purposes, influence means that our voters will preference Pokemon types that they can threaten with super effective damage, or the types that they resist. All the while, a Pokemon will vote against types that threaten it. Taking a step back, this pretty well sums up party politics and factions in the real world. And really, each type combination is its own micro-faction. What do I mean? Well, rationally speaking, with the same type combination, Pokemon like Bulbasaur and Amoonguss will have identical preferences, and are essentially in a voting block with each other. Makes sense, right? And we can quantify this. Don't worry, I won't go into the math. If you want my calcs, I'll post and explain a document on Discord. And join Discord anyway. It's fun. We have a gym challenge. Let's take a look at an example. A pure fairy type. No, not you. Next. Much better. As I was saying, a pure fairy type like Sylveon will always preference its own faction, fairy. Next, it will preference types it can influence or threaten, like dragon and fighting, while it will typically vote against types that threaten fairy, like poison and steel. For dual types, the same logic holds true, it just gets a bit more complicated. However, if one of its types has an advantage over the other type, it will vote for the weaker type. Why? Because it can better influence other Pokemon of that weaker type. So ultimately, the outcome comes down to a combination of what is your type and what type would you most like to face in battle, resulting in each type combination having a unique order of preferences from 1 to 18. Reading between the lines, this means that types with many resistances, for instance Steel, face an uphill battle. That's probably enough background for now, aside from mentioning that we will be using 4 different electoral systems in this video to see what results we can get, starting with first past the post or plurality voting. Sick. Let's go. So, first past the post is a common electoral system. It's used in the United States, the United Kingdom, and many other countries. Essentially, it boils down to whoever gets the most votes wins. Full stop, it's over. Throw away the key, no majority needed, only a plurality. It's a simple system, and it works decently well the fewer candidates there are, but it doesn't work so well for us today. With 18 candidates representing 18 types, This system means that we will be electing a candidate with a sizable minority of the vote. Which type wins here? Well, water is the most abundant type in the Pokemon world, and even with our rational model, the water type takes a narrow win with grass second and psychic third. But notice the even results. Water wins with just under 11% of the vote. That's not much of a mandate to govern the Pokemon world. But if Kyogre, our water candidate, gets its way, some of its political opponents might just, well, wash away. If we break down this vote into the 9 generations, yes, we're going generation instead of region, so that Pokemon introduced in the same time period are together. That said, sometimes I may just say the region name for the relevant generations. Just remember that Alolan forms count for Gen 7, Gen 8 covers Pokemon introduced in both Galar and Hisui, and Gen 9 those Pokemon from Paldea, Kitakami, and Blueberry. Anyway, breaking down the national vote by generation, our results change. Generations 1 and 2 still vote for water, aligning with the overall national vote, but it falls short in the other 7. Psychic takes the win in Generations 3 and 8, and Fairy gets the dub in Generation 6. Makes sense, right? New type, stack the decks. But the biggest winner, taking not 1, not 2, but 3 generations, was the Grass type, winning in Gens 5, 7, and 9, and tying for the win in Generation 4 with Normal and Water. Yes, we have a 3-way tie for Generation 4. In the real world, I imagine this would mean that everyone would just head back to the polls. But we won't do that. Instead, let's try something one step more complicated to fix this. And also, as fun as these results are, for us, with 18 candidates, each with their own following, first past the post really isn't viable. This time, let's try runoffs. In this system, the top 2 candidates from a first round plurality vote advance to a second round if no one has a majority. Now, our Pokemon voters will have a binary choice with no option to abstain. And yes, that means voting is compulsory in the Pokemon world. In the real world, this system is notably used in French presidential elections, as well as some states in the US for congressional and state elections. In the first round of our Pokemon vote, the top 2 types nationally were water and grass. After the first round, water has a small edge, 10.96% of the vote to grass's 10.47%, which equates to just 5.5 votes. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, if a Pokemon has tied preferences where they equally prefer 2 types, half votes will happen. This is particularly common among pure normal Pokemon who view many types equally. Anyway, the first round votes cast for both water and grass are locked in. This model being rational means they cannot and will not change their vote. But all those who voted for the other 16 types must pick a preferred option between water and grass. Sadly, this wasn't much of a contest. With 715 votes to 412, the grass type wins in a landslide, 63% to 37%. Why? Well, grass has a bunch of weaknesses, meaning that Pokemon who voted for these types, strong against grass, heavily favoured grass in the second round. For example, 69 of the 70 first round votes cast for fire shifted their preference to grass, Volcanion being the single switch to water, as it is a dual water-fire type. Overall, only 3 of 16 other types shifted their votes predominantly to water. Electric, which is super effective against water, ground, which is weak to both water and grass, but because grass resists ground, the earth dwellers moved mostly to water. And finally rock, which is also weak to both these types, and split almost evenly with a slight edge to water thanks to the abundance of dual water and rock Pokemon. So yes, if you're reading between the lines, types will rely on their weaknesses to gain preferential votes. Hence why grass, with many weaknesses, has an advantage over water. Even worse, water has just 2 weaknesses, with one of them being grass. But grass types will naturally preference their own type over water anyway. At a generation level, water is, destroyed here as well. As the most abundant type of all, it naturally did well in the first round, winning 2 regions in first past the post, and as you'll see, finishing second in a few others. In runoffs, water didn't get a single win. Why? Because other populous types either hate it or are generally indifferent. For instance, Poison finished second to Water in Gen 1. Remember how Kanto has just a wild number of poison types? Anyway, in the runoff, Poison snuck home in a tight contest, winning by 4 votes. Plenty of dual grass poison types powering this win, with Psychic and Ground types seeing a chance to influence with super effective damage. On the flip side, Fire and Rock types don't want to see Water win. Over in Gen 2, Water also dropped into second. This time it was Normal sneaking across the line, winning by 6 votes. Despite only having one weakness to fighting and few fighting types in Johto, Normal's neutrality and other types' hatred of Water gave it the edge. For Generation 3, Psychic kept its primary vote lead, with Water yet again falling short in second, this time losing by 11 votes. First round votes for Bug, Dark, Fire and Ghost were key to Psychic's win. Skipping over to the islands for Generation 7, we have a Grass versus Water showdown. And just like the national vote, Grass gets a dominant win. With far more weaknesses, Grass racked up an additional 59 votes compared to just 28 for Water on preferences. The final vote split 65-35, a slightly wider margin than the national result. And it's the same story over in Gen 9. Yet again, Grass versus Water, and for the same reason as before, Grass's initial 4.5 vote lead blew out to a 48 vote win, more than doubling Water's runoff vote, winning 69% to 31%. And yes, that is 5 regions done for runoffs and 5 runner-ups for Water. Rough. Generation 6 is a bit of an outlier, with 2 uncommon types squaring off, Fairy and Dragon. But if you think about it, this makes sense. Carlos introduced the Fairy type to counter dragons, and with a Dragon Fossil, a Dragon Pseudo, and a multi-form Dragon Legendary, Fairy type's fodder had enough primary votes to finish in second. In the runoff, Fairy retained its advantage. Why? Well, the reasonably common starter types will include Electric here. They hate the prospect of dragons, handing the win to Fairy by a 7-vote margin. Jumping over to Generation 8, Psychic and Dark square off, and with few weaknesses, this one was tight. Both Psychic and Dark share a weakness to Bug, splitting the vote there. Fairy and Fighting types love seeing Dark on the battlefield, while Ghosts love Psychic. But this time, resistances were also crucial, and with Steel dominant against Psychic, the Metalmons came up clutch. In the end, their 6 votes were the difference, with Psychic winning by 6. Our final 2 generations proved more complicated. Generation 4 had a 3-way tie under our first system, so before getting down to a 1v1, we need a 3-way runoff between the normal, water and grass types. Each tied on 14 votes after round 1. When the others recast their votes, surprise surprise, the water type lost ground again. Before accounting for split votes, where Pokemon had equal preferences among these types, water only gained 9 votes, while normal gained 17, and grass gained a whopping 35. Still without a majority, water is eliminated, giving us a runoff between normal and grass. Normal did close the gap, but not by enough. Grass winning Generation 4 by just 3 votes. Generation 5 needed the same treatment, but not because of a tie for first. In fact, Grass had a clear lead in round 1. Instead, Psychic and Dark were tied for second. Applying the same process, preference votes gave Dark an edge over Psychic, but with plenty of flying and fire types in Unova and a smattering of ice and poison, Grass took a healthy win by a 46-vote margin. So runoffs are fun, and the system brought about some different outcomes. It's key to state here though that this didn't actually change the result per se. Instead, these results show a clearer picture of how voter preferences can flow when pitting the highest vote winners against one another. Overall, 2 first-round winners lost, a tie was resolved, and the grass type dominated. Now, with that done, what would happen if we tried simulating runoffs between every possible combination? And why not make this resemble something real-world like the Electoral College? Wait, the Pokélectoral College. I'm a genius. I am a genius. The Electoral College is a system unique to United States presidential elections, which, rather than being just one election, are more accurately 51 individual elections contributing to a national outcome. In the US, every state except Maine and Nebraska allocate electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis, with the number of electoral votes given to each state apportioned based on population. Well, almost. They're mostly population-based, matching the total number of House and Senate seats for each state, where House seats are apportioned on population and each state has an equal number of senators. And of course, DC gets 3, thanks 23rd Amendment. Adding up electoral votes, whichever candidate reaches 270 or more nationally takes the win. Now, applying this to Pokemon, because, what else would I do with my time? We can apportion Pokélectoral votes among Pokemon generations. But how many Pokélectoral votes should we have? Well, 151 votes to win is quite poetic for the Pokemon world, so there will be a total of 301 Pokélectoral votes up for grabs, with 151 guaranteeing a win and there being no chance of a tie. Now, apportioning these votes across 9 generations, with a similar caveat to the US Senate, so that we have a federalist-like protection for smaller generations, thanks Carlos for the small decks, we get 44 votes in Kanto. I mean, Gen 1. Anyway, you get the gist by now. 30 for Johto, 39 for Hoenn, 31 for Sinnoh, a peak of 45 for Unova, followed by a low of 22 in Carlos, 27 for Alola, 28 for Gen 8, covering Galar and Hisui, and 35 for Gen 9, inclusive of recent DLC. With this model ready to go, we can apply it to 153 different type matchups. And we can also break this down into generation results, with each applying a winner-take-all approach to casting their Pokélectoral votes. Now, don't worry, as fun as it would be, I'm not going to go through all 153 matchups today. We'd be here a long time. Instead, we'll see some high-level observations, check out a few examples, and we'll also take a look at how well each type performed in this model. First up, our closest Pokélectoral college result, which was Electric versus Fairy. Interesting. Let's take this one slowly, generation by generation. Despite being close overall, results in Kanto were anything but. Powered by Kanto's stacked lineup of poison types, Fairy won Generation 1 in a wash, with 66% of the vote, taking the first 44 Pokélectoral votes. Gen 9 was also a blowout, but in the opposite direction. The Electric type returning serve with 57% of the Paldea, Kitakami, and Blueberry vote for 35 Pokélectorals. Fairy won the Johto vote by 9, add 30 Pokélectorals to the Fairy column, but Gen 3 leveled the contest. A 3-vote win for Electric, giving it 39 Pokélectoral votes, both types now on 74. The Fairy type had the edge in both Generations 6 and 7. No surprise, introduced in Gen 6, Fairy was the fresh new thing. Combined, Fairy gains another 49 Pokélectoral votes. But, catching up, Electric took Unova. The battle is on. Fairy leading 123 to 119, with just Gens 4 and 8 remaining. Sinnoh was decided by just 2 votes, with Electric taking all 31 Pokélectorals. The winner-take-all system is kinda wild like that. Narrow win, but you get the whole cake. Electric is now up to 150. But the Galar Hisui vote narrowly favoured Fairy, and with the last 28 Pokélectoral votes in their column, Fairy took the tightest of wins, 151 to 150. What an absolutely wild result. Fairy is up by 1 vote where it matters, but on the popular vote, it won by a 40-vote margin, or about 3.5%. This shows that there is a decent possibility of types winning the popular vote, but losing the Pokélectoral college. Now, that sounds familiar. Flashback to the presidential elections of 2000 and 2016, and if you're a politics nerd like me, also 1824, 1876, and 1888, with 2024 a few weeks away at the time of recording. And yes, you better believe that it happened here as well, but only 8 times out of 153 matchups, or roughly 5% of the time. With a lower popular vote, Ice beat Normal, Fire beat Dragon, Dark beat Fighting, Poison beat Rock, Flying beat Fairy, and Ground beat Fighting, Bug, and Psychic. Yeah, wow, the Ground type really taking advantage here. but all 8 of these wins weren't from too far behind on the popular vote. In each of these cases, the type that won the Pokélectoral College had at least 49% of the vote, which means the loser had between 50 and 51% of the popular vote. Of these, the widest popular vote margin nationally was just 19 votes. 19 out of 1,127. And that's still pretty close, right? This being Dark's popular vote loss to the fighting type, 554 to 573. But this was also the widest Pokélectoral win in this scenario, with the Dark type riding some close regional victories to take the win 202 Pokélectorals to 99. On this metric, Poison also beat Rock by a comfortable margin. Oh, yes, there are splits if there are ties within regions, but there's no ties overall. Funnily enough, this result is despite Rock winning the national vote by 1. Perhaps the most wild thing about these 8 elections, each outcome would change if very few votes were different. 3 of 8 elections would reverse if just 1 vote flipped. In these cases, tying up one region to be a draw is enough for the other type to win overall. Another 3 elections would change if just 2 or 3 votes reversed, and all 8 would change with a maximum of 7 votes flipped. Looking to the popular vote, our Poison versus Rock matchup had the closest popular margin of all, Rock edging out Poison by just 1 vote. And these types also featured in the second and third closest contests, Poison beating Water by 2 votes, and Rock beating Fire by 3. Overall, we had many close popular results. 20 elections were decided by less than 2%, or closer than a 51 to 49 finish. Another 29 had a margin below 5%. That's almost 1/3 of matchups that are highly competitive. And still somewhat competitive, another 34 had popular vote margins between 5 and 10%. But after this, we get to the landslide territory. 38 were decided by 10 to 20 point margins, with 32 very uncompetitive contests decided by more than 20 points. As you would expect, rationally, when comparing Pokélectoral results to the popular vote, types should only start being competitive in the college once they get close to 50% of the popular vote. As this graph shows, there's a sudden spike in Pokélectoral success between 45 and 55% of the popular vote. Splitting the graph into quarters, these are our clear winners on both metrics, popular and Pokélectoral, with losers on both metrics here. These 8 results are our overachievers, who lost the popular vote but still won the election, as we already discussed, with these 8 the underachievers. But which type had the worst individual result? Well, Steel, who polled an abysmal 29.4% against the Water type. It goes without saying, this was a Pokélectoral sweep, 301 to 0 in favour of Water. And sadly, Steel was not even close to competitive in any region. Now, speaking of Pokélectoral sweeps, there were a lot of them. 44 in all, which is 29% of our contests. Every one of these results was also uncompetitive in the popular vote. Steel, probably unsurprising, was the most swept type, failing to win a single Pokélectoral vote in 11 of their 17 matches. Ghost was the next worst offender at 10. This goes to show that a type resisted by many others, like Steel, is not a desirable candidate for other types. Nor is Ghost desirable, a type who hit almost everything for at least neutral damage, with a solid mix of immunities and resistances. And which types did the sweeping? Well, Grass had the most, with 8 of 17 matches ending in sweeping victories. Water and Ground swept 5 times each, while Normal, Ice, Bug, and Rock had 4. Interestingly, every single type except for Ghost and Steel had at least 1 win in a sweep. All of this begs the question, how did each type do? Well, let's rank their performance. These rankings are primarily based on how many wins they had, and secondly, on their average performance on Pokélectorals and the popular vote. So, from 18 to 1, in last place we have Ghost. The Ghost type won 287 Pokélectoral votes, collectively across all 17 of their contests. Yep, they won an average of just 16.9 of 301 Pokélectoral votes, or 5.6%. Ghost also averaged a poor 39.4% in the popular vote, performing worst in earlier generations, but to be fair, there were almost zero Ghosts there. It goes without saying that as the Ghost candidate, Houndstone did not win a single election. Its best individual result, unsurprisingly, was against Steel, where Ghost actually almost won. Yeah, funnily enough, almost half the Pokélectorals that Ghost won were in this contest alone. So my apologies to Ghost-type lovers, but take solace here. This really just means that Pokemon overall are scared to face your favorite type. Next up, as expected, we have Steel in 17th, but with a decently better record, despite being swept 11 times. Their Pokélectoral average more than doubled Ghost, but 37.9 out of 301 is still really bad. Their popular vote was also better, but only marginally at 40.9%. Not good, but the Steel candidate Melmetal actually had 2 Pokélectoral wins, beating Ghost and Fairy. Just as you would expect, most Pokemon don't want to face a Steel opponent. From this point, the types start to get better more quickly. Dragon is the OG ultimate type, nerfed by Fairy in Gen 6 because a lot of other types just didn't stack up. Even still, it ranks 16th because the starter types, including the abundant water and grass types, do not want to face a dragon. Its Pokélectoral results suffer as a result. That said, an average of 87 is more than double Steel, while Dragon's popular vote is a big step up, at 45.7% across its 17 contests. Dragon won 4 elections, its wins over Steel and Ghost are a given, but it had a particularly impressive win against Water. And capping it off for Dragon, it was the #1 team in the Pokélectoral College for Generation 6, winning the vote in Kalos 15 of 17 times. Fairy was next at 15th. Yep, what a surprise, another OP type towards the bottom. Again, higher expected Pokélectoral votes at an average of 95.8, with 47.1% of the popular vote across their contests. Fairy had a 5-12 record, with notable wins over the 3 types it is super effective against: Dragon, Fighting, and Dark. Sadly, despite winning the first round popular vote in Kalos, the Fairies couldn't back this up here, with only 5 wins and a tie for Fairy in Gen 6. The Flying type is decently strong competitively, but less strong at the polls. Also with 5 wins from 17, Flying had an average of 48.7% of the popular vote. It was also a big step up from Fairy in the Pokélectoral College, averaging 125.6 here, or 41.3% of the total. Despite having mostly negative results, Flying was actually the #1 type in Generation 2, winning the Jotonian vote in 16 of its 17 elections, with a single loss to the Ice type. And Flying actually held its own pretty well against favoured types, losing tight elections to both Grass and Water. That said, a loss is still a loss, and Flying is stuck in 14th, just ahead of its mortal enemy, Electric. With 6 wins, Electric scrapes ahead of Flying, but funnily enough, this type averaged a popular vote of 47.6% and 112 Pokélectorals. From this, it's fair to say that when Electric won, it was generally a close result, but when they lost big. Highlights for Pichu, our Electric candidate, were 2 wins over types ranked above them, Fire and Rock. In 12th, it's Dark. Not much to say, 7 wins, 10 losses, they beat the types they should beat. Got that cheeky Pokélectoral win over Fighting with a popular loss. They swept Ghost just like you'd expect, but also got swept by Bug and Grass. Overall, Dark averaged 48.6% of the popular vote, which is still worse than Flying, despite Dark being 2 ranks higher. That said, Dark had a better expected Pokélectoral return with an average of 128.7. And believe it or not, in 12th, Dark is actually the last type to average below 50% on either of our metrics, which shows just how badly some of those bottom types performed to let 11 be above average. Now, the worst of our average types was Fire. 8 wins, 9 losses for a slightly negative return, but Fire averaged 50.8% in the popular vote, powered heavily by the 8th biggest popular win of all, in a 735 to 392 demolition of Steel. Within this election, the Fire type had the heaviest generation win of any contest, Fire winning Kanto with 81.5% of the Cantonian vote. Get wrecked. Despite losing more elections than it won, Fire averaged 163 Pokélectoral votes, with big wins over Ice, Flying, Bug, Ghost, Dark, Steel, Fairy. Yep, that's right, 7 of its 8 wins were blowouts. But even though Ice was demolished by Fire, it snuck ahead with 9 wins. It also outperformed the 2 types immediately above it in both the Popular Vote and Pokélectoral College, with an average of 51.5% popular and 170 Pokélectorals. Also, Ice is the first type so far to have multiple sweeps to its name, winning 301-0 over Ghost and Steel, as you might expect, but also to beat Flying and Electric. That said, Ice had some embarrassing losses to Water and Rock, both in sweeps. Scraping into the top half, Fighting with a 10-7 record. Sadly for Fighting, they would have been ranked number 6 if not for 2 Pokélectoral losses from Popular Vote wins. Despite this, Fighting was the definition of solid, with an average of 51.4% in the Popular Vote and 164 in the College. Fighting's elections were typically close, with only 1 sweep to its name. That said, it was also one of just 5 types to never be swept itself, along with Bug, Grass, Poison and Psychic ranked above it. Compared to some of the other types above, Fighting just got the job done enough for a positive record, rather than dominating its elections. Next is Poison, and I reckon no other type this high has been carried by one generation. It was the top performer in Kanto, 16 wins and 1 loss here, and that's the big reason why Poison ended up with 10 wins. With some average results elsewhere, Poison was among the worst type in several generations. That said, with an almost guaranteed 44 Pokélectorals in Gen 1, this kept it in the mix. Overall, Poison had an average of 51.4% in the Popular Vote and 169 Pokélectorals. Lucky number 7 today is Rock. Yet another type on 10 wins, but ahead of the other 2 on our metrics, with an average of 52.1% in the Popular Vote and 179 Pokélectorals. Rock was unlucky to lose to Poison despite a 1-vote popular win, but that said, it definitely had its share of landslide elections. 7 of its 17 contests ended in sweeps. It won 4 of these, but was obliterated by Water, Grass, and Ground. At number 6, our final team tied on 10 wins. It's the Bug type, with the best Popular Vote and Pokélectoral average of this bunch, 52.4% popular and 184.2 Pokélectoral. Within these results, Bug was not swept by any type, and it took 4 sweeps itself. That said, Ghost, Dark, Steel and Fairy didn't exactly shine in these elections. Overall, Bug was quite consistent, and even managed to beat 2 of the 5 types ranked above it. Neutrality paid dividends for Normal, finishing 5th with 11 wins. As our first type to average above 200 Pokélectoral votes, and with 53.3% of the Popular Vote, it's no wonder it claimed 4 sweeps, and was only swept once by Rock. Aside from this result, Normal never lost by all that much, typically staying close in both the Popular Vote and Pokélectoral College. And talk about consistency. Normal ranked in the top half of results for every generation. Our Plurality winner finishes 4th overall. Perhaps a disappointing end for Water, but with 12 wins and 5 losses, it's still doing pretty good. It just pipped Normal for a better Pokélectoral average, 202 to Normal's 201.7, and had a nice 53.8% of the Popular Vote across its 17 contests. But the Water type continued to be the bridesmaid in this video, and not the bride. It was never the best type in any generation here, 2nd best in Hoenn, 3rd in Sinnoh, and 4th in 3 others. All that said, 5 sweeps to its name is nice, but it was also swept, as we know, by the Grass type, its chief rival. Into the top 3, Psychic performed really well, winning 13 of its 17 elections. Its 4 losses, well, 2 were to some of its weaknesses in Bug and Dark, as well as the 2 types ranked above it. But despite this, Psychic actually had the 2nd best Popular Vote and Pokélectoral averages of all types, ahead of the type in 2nd place here, averaging 54% in the Popular and 212.1 Pokélectorals. But because wins take priority here, it takes 3rd place overall. Psychic had fewer sweeps among the top few teams, only taking down Steel and Electric, but Psychic was also the best performing type in 2 generations, Hoenn in Gen 3 and Galar Hisui in Gen 8. In both these generations, it won 17 of 17 contests. Very well done to Psychic. Perhaps the biggest surprise of this electoral system, because we haven't seen much success for this type so far, the Ground type comes in 2nd. It won 15 elections, losing just 2, although its 2 losses were a sweep against grass and a decently heavy defeat to water. But ground was consistent, ranked in the top 3 for the first 5 generations, including first in Generation 4. With these 5 generations comprising a majority of the Pokélectoral College, this powered most of ground's wins, and also came in handy for ground's 3 Pokélectoral wins despite losing the popular vote, with ground taking 4 of the first 5 generations in each of these wins against Fighting, Bug, and Psychic to take commanding leads. Overall, a great performance from ground, but it was definitely helped along by this particular electoral system. And of course, sitting pretty in first place, as you would expect, again it's the grass type. Let's reel off the insanely good stats for grass. 16 wins from 17 contests, we'll save who beat them for just a hot second, and of its 16 wins, grass had 8 sweeps. It averaged 57.3% of the primary vote, well ahead of Psychic, the next best on 54%. It also had an average 249 Pokélectoral votes, which is wild, 83% of the 301 available. Again, well ahead of Psychic's 212. On a generation level, grass was ranked in the top 8 in all generations. It was top 3 in 6 generations and first in 3, being the best performing type in generations 5, 7, and 9. Breaking this down further, in both generations 5 and 9, grass was undefeated, and it lost just once in generation 7 to the bug type. This was just pure domination for grass. All those weaknesses on the type chart finally coming up clutch. And yes, grass did lose that one election. I'm still holding back on who they lost to for the moment. That may just come up in our final electoral system. But to show just how strong grass was, they still polled 49.3% of the popular vote in their single loss, and it was close in Pokélectorals as well, losing 108 to 193. In this election, its loss in Generation 1 was costly, grass down here by 5 popular votes. Now, had this one generation result been different, grass would have taken the win. Overall, the Pokélectoral College, similar to its real-world counterpart, has strengths and weaknesses. It gives good protection to the interests of generations or regions on one hand, but it has the possibility to deny victory to the popular vote winner. And a reminder, that's not a political statement, that's just a fact. With all that said, the best performing type in this model, grass, was also the best performing type in runoffs, and it was second in plurality voting as well. But breaking these 3 systems down by generation or by region, grass has the edge in all 3. Therefore, the Pokélectoral College shows merit similar to previous systems. And before we move on to our final voting system, a quick note to say that across the 153 Pokélectoral contests, 172,431 votes were cast by our Pokemon voters. Democracy in action. Now to our final model, preferential voting. Being specific, we're looking at the alternative vote system, otherwise known as ranked choice, instant runoff voting. It has a lot of names. It's the system that's used in my home country of Australia, among other nations, and has now been adopted by a couple of states in the US. In this model, all our candidates will compete, but because we're looking to find a majority instead of just finding a plurality, we will progressively eliminate the lowest ranked candidate that remains, and redistribute their votes according to each of their supporters' next preference. This process is repeated until only 2 candidates remain, at which point one of them will have a majority. In our case, with perfectly rational voters, the final result will be exactly equal to the runoff results between the 2 types that are left standing. Of course, given my oh-so-subtle foreshadowing, this may just be the grass type's single runoff loss. If you hate the grass type, I guess this one's for you. Now for a bit of fun, we're going to watch this one visually, starting with the first round, or the primary vote. The flow of preferences will give certain types boosts on the graph, and when types are eliminated, they'll drop off the graph. Let's check out the results. Immediately out is Steel, finishing 18th here, with Fairy next. Ghost and Flying were tied. Yep, Flying is behind there. They're gone at the same time. Poison is done, Fighting falls, and Ground, Ice, and Fire just can't keep up. Dragon outperformed expectations, but it's out along with Normal and Rock. Pausing here, we're down to 5. Grass is streaking ahead, chased by Psychic, Bug is picking up speed with Water and Electric flagging. Electric falls at 16%, Water at 22%, and then Psychic at 32%, meaning that Bug is the only type that could topple Grass, winning the full preferential election by a slim margin of 50.67% to 49.33%, which is just a 15-vote margin. Now, why did this happen? Well, Grass and Bug share weaknesses to Fire and Flying. Both these types also resist Grass and Bug, meaning they're equals. Among the types with larger primary votes, Psychic voters preferenced Grass, but Water preferred Bug, and so did Electric and Rock. All this was enough for Bug to catch Grass, overtake, and win the election. Looking at these results from another angle, in terms of ranking change, we can see which types benefited most at each preference distribution. Early on, Ice got a nice bump from Steel, Dragon jumped from 12th to 6th after Fairy was eliminated, and with no early benefits, Poison dropped like lead as Grass hit the lead. Fighting and Ground going out back-to-back lifted Rock into the top 5, and Ground also saved Electric. When Fire was eliminated, Bug was one step away from going out as well. But thanks to preferences from Fire and from Rock, who was out soon after, Bug's stock rose very quickly. Electric falling at 5th almost put Water back into contention, but the Swimmers dropping out in 4th pushed the Bug type into the lead because they voted against Grass. And finally, the original and preferenced Psychic votes weren't enough to get Grass back to the top. I love these graphs. They really paint an interesting picture and show that the order of elimination can have a major impact. And for the final time, let's see how this all looks at a generational level. In Generation 1, Water and Poison have had the most success so far, and both contended again. After the less competitive types were knocked out, 6 types were locked in battle, each ranging from 11% to 22% of the vote. Electric fell and so did Rock, Poison taking the lead ahead of Water, with Grass a clear third. But after Normal was eliminated, Grass flew into first, Poison dropped to elimination at third, meaning the final pairing was Grass versus Water. So yeah, poor Water, Grass won yet again. Next, Gen 2. Would you believe that Grass was actually eliminated early here? Well, early by their standards. They still finished 7th. Fire went 2, which sprang Bug into contention, so that, with just 4 types left, Bug had a 5% lead over Water. Ground was further back, and Normal, who won the runoff in Johto, fell at 4th. Now down to 3, Bug's lead over Water had grown to 7.5%. It looked like they had it in the bag, but unfortunately for the Bugs, Ground preferences did them few favours. Why? Because Ground hits Water for neutral, but Bug resists. Water. Yes, you heard me right. Water squeezing home for a 50.5 to 49.5 win. It couldn't get any closer. Over in Gen 3, it was always a two-way contest between Psychic and Water. With 6 types left, these two were still in the lead. But then Rock fell, putting Bug back in contention. Down to 4 types, Water and Psychic were still leading, but with Bug eliminated here, Grass shot back into first, eliminating Water. Poor Water. Grass just always one step ahead. That said, the Water type did get some revenge. With its preference flow solidly favouring Psychic, Grass finished 2nd, meaning that Psychic, winning here, swept results in Generation 3, winning first past the post, Runoff, Preferential, and all 17 of its Pokélectoral matchups in the Hoenn region. Liza and Liza's brother would be proud. To Generation 4, and after eliminating half of the field, Grass led, with Normal, Water, and Bug tied in 2nd. But with Dark and Dragon knocked out, Psychic and Electric moved into the lead. This was probably the most up and down preferential vote so far. Water fell at 6th, Grass at number 5, and Normal 4. Psychic just missed out on the final, with Bug and Electric neck and neck. In the end, the Bug type took the win, 53 to 47. But it's nice to see Electric actually have some success. So far, 4 generations, 4 different winners, but these even results can't last forever. Over in America Generation, Grass had the lead from start to finish, holding a strong edge until the last few eliminations, when Fire and Flying stormed into contention. When Flying was eliminated at number 3, Grass led 37.2% to Fire's 35.4%. But with Flying type preferences splitting strongly for Grass, it won the region handily. That said, it's great to see types like Flying and Fire be competitive here when they've had little glory so far in the video. Gen 6 was much closer. Early on, it was a 3-way race between Fairy, Dragon, and let me check my notes. Grass! Wow, original. But that was only until Water was eliminated, catapulting Fire into the lead. With 4 left, Fire was leading Grass, Fairy, and Dragon. And with the Dragons eliminated, Fire and Grass moved further ahead. But Fairy falling in 3rd shot Grass to another win. With Fire resisting Fairy and Steel, and Poison strong against Grass, original Fairy votes, as well as its preferences from later rounds, went to Grass on a 2-to-1 ratio. In Alola, Dragon started in 2nd last, but it quickly rose to 5th to be in contention. For the 3rd straight region, Fire emerged as a contender too, but Grass and Electric held a monopoly over the 2 top positions until Water was eliminated at number 6, pushing Fire into 2nd. Dark fell at 5th and Electric at 4th. Dragon's Cinderella run also came to an end, just unable to keep up with the surging starter types. So, for the 3rd consecutive generation, Grass beats Fire. If it's any consolation for the Fire type, had these been in Gens 1, 2, or 3, Fire would have actually got the win. But unfortunately for the Bernie Bros, you see what I did there? Hilarious! Recent generations have been uncommonly kind to the Grass type when our model is applied. In Galar Hisui, our main contenders early on were Psychic and Dark, with Psychic unchallenged at number 1 until more than half of the field was eliminated. With 7 types left, Psychic still led, ahead of Grass, Dark, and Ice, all tied for 2nd. With the Water type gone, Ice took the lead, and soon after, Electric fell as well, preferencing the types that weren't Grass, who fell at number 4. Now down to 3, it was tight, but Dark had the lead. Inconveniently, we had a tie for 2nd between Ice and Psychic. So what to do here? Usually, if this was an earlier round, I would just eliminate both. But wanting a contest for 1st meant we needed a preference countback, which involved looking at which of Ice and Psychic had the edge among each other's remaining preferences. This gave the Ice type a narrow edge, pushing it into the runoff against Dark. And with Psychic eliminated, Ice actually snuck past Dark for a 52-48 win. Yes, the Ice type won. That's wild. The Ice type never wins anything. I mean, it does have a lot of issues on the old type chart, so kinda makes sense. Finally, Generation 9, and let's be real, we know what's happening here. Grass wins yet again. With 9 types left, Grass had double the vote of its next competitor. The margin tightened here and there, but when Fire was eliminated, the lead for Grass was healthy. Until Electric was eliminated in 4th, breaking heavily against Grass, with the Poison type closing down Grass's lead from 13% to 6% in just 1 round. Sadly for the underdog, it was all too late. Dark broke almost evenly, giving Grass the win over Poison, 53-47. Overall, Grass won 5 generations in our preferential system, while Water, Psychic, Bug, and Ice each took 1. It's fun to see an unexpected type like Ice taking a win, and Bug winning that national vote was an unexpected detour. All that said, again, it was really Grass's day. Averaging their results across the 9 generations, Grass clearly ranked 1st on our preferential system, ahead of Water, Psychic, and Fire. Some types that performed well elsewhere, like Ground, were not so great here, while Electric and Fire had far better results in the preferential vote than in previous models. So this goes to show that when a sequential preference distribution is applied, voter preferences can tell a more complete story. Unlike a runoff, where the top 2 simply faced off, showing only the preferences of a few voters, a preferential model like this can show which 2 types all voters most wanted to see face off. What do I mean? Well, take a look at the national first preference. Water is 1st and Grass is 2nd. They move to a runoff thanks to the votes of a combined 242 Pokemon, or about 20.4% of the voting Pokemon population. That sounds ludicrous. Is this video just nuts? Probably. Anyway, The runoff candidates were essentially chosen by 1/5 of the population, whereas 100% of Pokemon had a say in grass-facing Bug as the final 2 preferential candidates, because their votes had been redistributed sequentially. Now, there is an argument to say that the final tally of Psychic votes shouldn't count in a statement like that, as they never preferenced either Grass or Bug until there was no other option. But even still, they made their voices heard at 16 different points in the process and were never forced to vote for their least preferred type. Of course, some would say that statement is just too complicated. This system is too complicated. I would say democracy is complicated. With our 4 systems done, let's recap the results visually, both nationally and by generation. As you can see, absolutely dominant throughout, the Grass type, but others like Psychic and yes, Water show that they are also electable. I had so much fun making this model, and I think it did a pretty good job of demonstrating rational behaviour at the polls and showcasing how these electoral systems work. It's been such a fun video to make, and I could say so much more, but I won't. I want you to tell me what you thought in the comments. What would you have done differently? Would you have changed the model, had a different focus? I'd love to hear. And I'd also love to hear if you'd like to see something similar in the future. While you're here, hit that subscribe button. I'm Pokedad. See you next time. Oh, wait, sorry. Before I sign off, we forgot a very important system. Undemocratic. All hail 100% of the vote to the Helix tickets. Bye.